So good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to have Congressman Rob Andrews with us here today. Congressman Andrews has been in Washington representing our district in New Jersey for over 20 years now. He has a lot of seniority, important committee assignments, and is a very, very progressive thinker. He's been a huge supporter of Coriell. He's facilitated introductions to the Department of Defense that are important in our personalized medicine program. And he really understands the importance of genetics going forward in medicine, which is of interest to a lot of us here. In fact, he hosted us in 2007, the end of 2007, on Capitol Hill in a press conference, and was the first participant in the Coriell Personalized Medicine Collaborative. So,
study all night for that.
But when I first was introduced to Congressman Andrews, I thought, well, the politicians really aren't going to understand this, and they aren't going to be very motivated. And boy, was I wrong. He is very, very smart, very hardworking guy, and represents us all very well. So it's a pleasure to have him here today, and I think you'll be impressed with what you hear.
Thanks,
so,
Mike. I appreciate it very much. Sure. We take this and let's see if I'm smart enough to get the microphone in my pocket. Mike, thank you. We are thrilled that you and this team of incredibly innovative, bright people are working and in many cases living in our community. I brag about Coriell a lot of places that I go, and you have validated my praise at every turn. It's a delightful place to be, and I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for dedicating your careers and your lives to this cause of breaking through and making great advances in the health sciences. It's really an exciting time to be involved in this, and that's what I want to talk about a bit this morning. Sometime if you have a little bit of extra time, a lot of extra time, I guess, go to the website of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Library, the FDR Presidential Library, and read a letter that Einstein wrote to President Roosevelt in early 1941. It's about a page and a quarter, and it lays out for President Roosevelt the fact that there has been, that time there had been major breakthroughs in splitting the atom and in harnessing the energy that comes from splitting the atom. And Einstein very succinctly laid out the possibilities that this would lead to for industry, but then he got into the possibilities for weaponry. And he talked about the fact that you needed uranium to really make this atom splitting project really go, and he noted that Hitler had recently put a ban on the export of uranium from Czechoslovakia, which the Nazis now controlled, and other parts of that world. And he gave Roosevelt an urgent plea to organize an effort within the American government to make rapid progress on building a weapon that could counter what the Nazis, he thought, were about to do. So this letter became the genesis of the Manhattan Project. And certainly we can differ and quarrel over the moral consequences of the decision President Truman made in 1945, but I don't think anybody can quarrel with the proposition that we should all be grateful that the Nazis were not the first to achieve this weapon. I think the world would have been a much more horrible and difficult place if that had been the case, and I don't know that our country would be here. The other event that I'm reminded of is that the year of my birth, which is 1957, I know I look much older than that, the Russians put the Sputnik into space. Now, I don't have any personal recollection of this, obviously at the time, but I've read a lot about it. And there was a period of real, I think the word panic is not too strong of a word in our academic and science community, that the Soviets, who clearly were a society very adverse to our society, had made this great leap forward into space, and we had not. And there was a very grave and urgent concern that the progress the Soviets were making would dwarf our progress and would give our principal adversary in the world a major advantage over us for the years to come. Sputnik then catalyzed the first student loan program in our country's history, called the National Defense Direct Student Loans, that President Eisenhower started. in the late 1950s. I went to school on one of those loans. Probably a few other people here did as well. And of course, it then inspired President Kennedy's initiation of the Apollo project in the 1960s, where he went to Houston in 1961 and set for the country the national goal of getting to the moon by the end of that decade. And I remember very poignantly, many of you are too young for this, but in 1969, sitting with my parents on a July night watching on a black and white television as Neil Armstrong, God rest his soul, first set foot on the moon. We did it. I think that we need the same sense of urgency that we had for the Manhattan Project and the Apollo project for the project of our times, which is, I believe, is a sweeping program to cure a lot of diseases that are ravaging our people and our country. And I think the triggers are not as dramatic as the Nazi incursion into nuclear weapons development, or as the Sputnik. But I find that the trigger events are benign and wonderful events that need to get the same degree of urgent attention. So this February, teams of researchers at Harvard and Columbia published results of independent studies that measured the way the tau protein goes haywire in the human brain and causes Alzheimer's disease, and sort of settled this dispute over whether Alzheimer's progresses like a virus or whether it sort of pops up like in a bad neighborhood all of a sudden some other place. And the dispute has more or less been resolved in favor of the virus theory. This very week, there were reports out that researchers have begun to categorize and isolate 4 different kinds of breast cancer to begin to think about what breast cancer really works like. This is the work that you are facilitating and that you are engaged in every day. And I think that we are making a mistake in this country, and that we're being far too modest and far too limited in our approach to this. At the National Institute of Health this year, we'll spend somewhere in the vicinity of about $35 billion on research, directly funded research, some of which comes here. That's a lot of money, $35 billion, but it's not a lot of money in an $18 trillion economy. We will spend more money this year in our auto industry, researching different consumer tastes and preferences in the color and shape of automobiles than we will in basic science research that could cure Alzheimer's or cancer. We're not putting the kind of emphasis in our country on these breakthroughs that I think that we should. I believe that this is the moment, this is the hour, when we should invest the same kind of resources in curing these diseases that we invested in the Manhattan Project because of the urgency of the Nazi challenge, and the Apollo project because of the urgency of the Soviet challenge in space. Now, the challenger is not an enemy state. The challenger is this wild, out-of-control tau protein that strangles neurons and makes people that we love not know us anymore in Alzheimer's. The challenge is this wildly growing malignant cell that destroys organs and steals people from us that we love very much. So I think in many ways it's a moral test of our country. There was an article written a few years back by a sociologist who put forward the proposition that the United States only really gets something done when there's a war on. That the only real breakthroughs in American life come when we're fighting a war. I really hope that's not true. I don't think that we need an enemy and an existential threat to do great things for our country. I think we can do great things for our country because it's the right thing to do. And I am dedicated to building a coalition of people that could understand the sweep and reach of such a challenge in our own time. My suggestion is we start with our wounded warriors. Every night when I'm in the Capitol, there's a man who works full-time during the day as a tour guide. And he takes, the regular tourists through the Capitol building, does a great job. At the end of his workday, when he's no longer being paid, on his own time, He goes to Walter Reed Hospital, Bethesda Naval Medical Center, and he takes young men and women who have been wounded, in some cases beyond recognition, in Afghanistan and Iraq, people who are maimed and injured in atrocious ways, and brings them to tour the Capitol at night for private tours, and always stops and introduces them to the members of Congress. And at first I would almost shy away from this because I thought I'd be so depressed and so disheartened by the terrible physical suffering of these men and women. But I now know better. I now make sure that I stop every time I see him with them, because their spirit is so inspiring and their patriotism is so inspiring. The first question these men and women typically ask me is, when can I go back to work in my job in the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, wherever they came from? They love their country enough that they want to go back to work and serving it. Well, we should love them enough to spare no expense, to push every envelope, to follow every lead, to find the kind of progress and breakthrough that would change their lives and put them back in a full and vibrant life, that can regenerate tissue, that can regenerate limbs, that can reverse pathologies that are destroying their lives because of their exposure to chemicals or wounds or whatever it happens to be. I think you could find the most conservative Republican and the most liberal Democrat who would believe in the proposition that we should spare no expense to do whatever we can to heal the wounds of these men and women. And candidly, that then becomes the impetus for breakthroughs in the civilian sector as well. If you can help a soldier who has traumatic brain injury, well, much of the same research is going to lead to progress for the grandmother with Alzheimer's. If you can learn how to regenerate skin for a soldier who suffered incredible wounds, then you can learn to regenerate other tissue that would help victims of gunshot wounds here, or that would help people that have perforations in various organs or other parts of their body that are making them dysfunctional. The economics of this are even more compelling than the morality of it. I'm suggesting that instead of spending $30 or $35 billion at the National Institute of Health, we should go to men and women like you, scientists, creative people, researchers, and say the question I think we should be saying. If money were no object, what could you accomplish? Now, we understand that there are people who will exaggerate and we can't spend your money willy-nilly. I understand that. But instead of saying to the scientist who's on the breakthrough of figuring out the next step in Alzheimer's research, instead of saying to her, well, what will you do with $5 million next year? Why don't we say to her, if we gave you a blank check, what could you accomplish and by when? This is the question we should be asking people. I think we should be borrowing something like $1 trillion and investing in medical research, not $30 or $35 billion a year. I think $1 trillion with a T is the kind of breakthrough that we needed. When we headed for the moon in the Apollo program, no one said, well, we can get the spaceship halfway to the moon, but because of budget cuts, we're going to turn around and come home. We didn't say we could get the spaceship to the point where it can orbit the moon, but we don't have enough money to actually send the lunar landing module to the moon itself and get it back. We finished the job. We were oriented by a purpose, not limited by false budgetary constraints. Now, I know what you're thinking. The country's borrowing 40% of what we spend. We have an enormous debt and deficit. We're drowning in red ink, and I'm standing here saying, spend another $1 trillion, borrow another $1 trillion? Yeah, I am saying that. Because here's what I think we could do to really make this work. The best way to climb out of a budget deficit is to create jobs and growth and wealth. When people are working, and they are paying taxes, and they're buying homes and buying cars and investing in businesses, that's when the economy grows. When the economy grows, we have more tax revenue coming in and fewer dollars going out for social welfare and other kinds of programs. That's what closes budget deficits, economic growth. But I do understand that we can't incur more debt and deficits, so here would be my proposition. If we were to borrow $1 trillion for the purposes of pursuing these cures, as I believe that we should. Well, given the interest rates that we pay right now, our annual mortgage payment, as it were, debt service obligation, would be about $20 billion a year. Billion with a B. My proposal would be, let's find a way to cut $40 billion a year to more than offset that 20, have a short-term reduction in our deficit, because you follow that our increased mortgage payment would be more than wiped out by other cuts that we can make. And here's where I'd cut. I'd get rid of the ethanol subsidy, which is this foolish thing we have where we pay corn farmers to sell their corn to energy companies rather than food companies for reasons that are lost on me. That would save us an enormous amount of money. You're not going to like this one, but for instance, I would get rid of federal subsidies for beach erosion projects here in New Jersey. I love the Jersey Shore, not the show, the place. I think it's an awesome place, but I think that we should pay for this ourselves. I don't think Iowa corn farmers should be paying for beach erosion in New Jersey, and I don't think we should be paying to subsidize Iowa corn farmers. We could easily cut $35 or $40 billion a year from our enormous federal budget, come out in the black in this transaction, and pump an enormous amount of money into the best and the brightest in this country. Someone is going to find a cure for Alzheimer's in the next couple of decades. Are we going to be selling that cure to the rest of the world or buying it from the rest of the world? Someone is going to get a breakthrough that figures out how to reverse the ravaging tide of malignancy in someone's breast or someone's kidney or someone's lungs. Someone's going to figure that out. Are we going to buy that cure from the rest of the world or sell it to the rest of the world? This, I believe, is the threshold question for the country. If you look out these windows, 40 or 50 years ago, there were 15,000, maybe 20,000 people working at the southern end of Broadway at the New York Shipbuilding Company, building ships. One of them was my father. If you look over this way to where L3 is now, RCA was building, or actually Campbell Soup was on that site. Campbell Soup was making soup and shipping it to the rest of the world. That we still, thank goodness, have Campbell Soup in the city, but they don't make soup here, they make decisions. We had RCA, which of course is in part the Victor building. It was making television sets and military electronics and shipping that to the rest of the world. So 50 years ago, there would have been about 50,000 people working at those three employers, making something and selling it to the rest of the world. And these consumers then became the homeowners that made Cherry Hill, and made sure the mall got there, and built the whole, Virtua Hospital exists because of them. And that's where our rest of our economy really came from. Well, we, like the rest of the country, are in a position where we're really not making and selling things around the world anymore. We're just recirculating our own income. So the largest employers in our region are the hospitals and the state government, which are great employers. But we're recirculating the same money that's already here instead of bringing in wealth and income from the outside. We're not going to be building ships here, many. RCA is not going to build a new plant here to employ people to make televisions. It's not, the world has changed. What we can do is find things that we do well. And what we do very well, starting with you here, what we do very well is to find the approach that'll find these cures. The moral virtue of this needs no discussion. The ability to sit across from someone who doesn't know who you are anymore, an aunt, an uncle, a father, a mother. Imagine, what's it worth to you to be able to cure that person, know who you are again? What's that worth? This is something about every American family has felt. But the economic case for this is compelling. The jobs, the industries, the companies, the growth that could be created by us leading the world, as we did in the Manhattan Project out of necessity, as we did in the Apollo Project out of ambition. This is the direction in which I think we should take our country. This should not be a Republican or Democratic issue. It should be done in a way that's fiscally responsible so that we save more than we spend on our borrowing at the outset. But I think that the target, the unleashing of investment and companies and industries and jobs will be overwhelmingly positive and help to bring us back to where we ought to be. So, go back and read Einstein's letter to Roosevelt. And every place where he talks about uranium development, think about stopping the spread of tau and Alzheimer's. Think about stopping the rapid spread of malignancy as cells kill organs and cancer. Plug in those terms, and I think if we apply the same urgency that that Einstein so directly and appropriately decided to apply to nuclear weaponry, that we can lift our country, we can accomplish great things. And I know that Coriell Institute will be very much in the middle of this. There is no way that we can proceed on this kind of ambitious research program for our country and not have the work that these ladies and gentlemen do right in the middle of it. So I have a parochial interest in this, but I also have a more global interest in this. I think the right thing for our country and for our region is to embark on this kind of urgent, far-reaching national priority. And I look forward to you being right in the middle of it. Now what I'd like to do is answer any questions you have about anything, not limited to this topic. Anything you'd like to ask me, I'd like to answer. Yes, sir.
So in such a national mobilization, skills in things like science, technology, mathematics, engineering are going to be critical. But I keep hearing and seeing test scores nationally for U.S. teenagers coming out with 20 and 30 countries ahead of us. So my question is, what do you think is underlying that sort of a pattern? And secondly, what do you think can and should be done at the federal level to help turn it around?
What is underlying our underperformance in math and science? I think it's three things. I think that we have the wrong social contract with our teachers. I have a lot of teachers in my family, and I love teachers very, very much. And I think that here's the problem. We don't pay great teachers nearly what they're worth. We don't give them the professional respect that they are worthy of. But we also don't demand enough of teachers who are mediocre or struggling. I think we have to have a whole new bargain with the teaching profession in our country. I think they should be paid more. I think they should be given greater professional standing and respect, but I think more should be demanded of them. And I think tenure needs to be transformed from being, as it should be, a guarantor of academic freedom and a guarantor against political interference, but not what it's become, which is a protection against mediocrity. That's the first thing I think we have to do. Second thing I think we have to do is recognize a cultural bias that we have that's really hurting our country. And I'm delighted to see so many women in this room, and a little surprised to see so many women in this room. And the reason for that is that only 14% of our graduate school seats in math, science, and engineering are held by women in this country right now. Now, this is not because men are smarter than women. I am certain of this fact. Raising two daughters, having a wife, two mothers-in-law, two female, I'm certain of that. I'm reminded of it every day. But there's something that happens with math and science and adolescent girls. There's something that happens to adolescent girls across the board. Trust me, I'm raised to it. But something happens at like 7th grade or so where girls who are good at math and science are somehow pushed away from it because of cultural forces that say that math and science isn't feminine or pretty or cool. And I think we've got to destroy that myth and get more women in this country into math and science and keep them here. I'm delighted again to see so many women in this room today, but it's exceptional. Most places like this that are very high skill, high-end, technical are male dominated, and I think that's a problem. Third thing we have to do, and I think it does relate to the broader discussion this morning, I think we lack a sense of national purpose. Again, I was born in 1957, so when the moonshot happened, I was a little kid. And one thing I remember is that every time there was a splashdown or a takeoff, we'd stop what we were doing in school, and they'd wheel a television in so we could watch it. It was a huge deal to watch this on TV. We all felt like we were part of it somehow, that the country was working toward this goal, and most kids I knew wanted to become scientists at that point. They're really inspired by it. We've lost that somehow. So I think plugging in a sense of national purpose, dramatically improving our teaching standards and our teaching performance, and finding a way to keep more of our best and brightest in the field, our women, I think those are three really important steps. Yes?
The prescription drugs, say we create drugs that can cure Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
The other side of it, how can people afford that who don't have health care, who don't have the money? What's being done about that for people? I know Obamacare has been put into place, but as far as prescription drugs, there are many people who can't afford them right now.
The best way to reduce the cost of prescription drugs is to permit Medicare to negotiate for the price of what it pays, which would then help the rest of the market. The number one buyer of prescriptions in our country is Medicare. But believe it or not, there is a law that I didn't vote for. There is a law that prohibits the people who run Medicare from negotiating the price of the drugs that they buy. They're prohibited from doing it. And the theory is, well, we don't want government fixing the price of anything, but the real reason behind this was that the pharmaceutical companies wanted to make a killing on this. And so that's step one. I do believe there ought to be negotiation, just like, for instance, the VA negotiates when it buys a Coumadin, and it pays about 40% of what Medicare pays for the same product. There's no reason that that has to be. So that would then spread the benefits to the rest of the market, I think. The second thing we need to do is on the drug intellectual property laws. Rather than give a firm a period of exclusivity, meaning no one else can make a generic for that drug, for a fixed period of time, I think they should have a period of exclusivity for a certain rate of return. Here's the way I'd work it. Let's say that the average rate of return on a successful drug is triple what you invested. Okay? I would let a drug company have an exclusive right to that drug until they made a 4 or 5 times return. But as soon as they hit that, then the generic should be able to kick in and compete with them. Now, for some drugs, they'd hit the 5x rate of return in 2 or 3 years. In others, it might be 9 or 10 years. But I think that would be the better way to do this, because the way it works right now is if someone comes up with a great drug that really works, they get, I guess it's 7 years, I think is a period of exclusivity right now. It's a long period. And they kind of get past that rate of return. When generics enter the marketplace, the consumer benefits. And I think that would be a way to help make that happen. Now, the problem with that is some of the drug companies obviously oppose that view, but I think it benefits the consumers, and that's the change that we ought to make. This is an awesome place. What you do here every day is unbelievable. And all these things that I talked about this morning about breakthroughs in Alzheimer's and reversing cancer, really winning a war, a real war on cancer after all these years, I believe these things are going to happen. The question is whether they happen sooner or later. I want sooner. The question is whether they happen in a way that's centered in the United States or whether we're sort of a collateral beneficiary. I want them centered here. I want us to lead the world in this. And I know that there is no set of circumstances under which Coriell is not central to that effort. So you have my assurances that I will do whatever I can, whenever I can, to make sure that you continue to do the fine work that you're doing here, because we are very, very proud of you. I thank you for your time and attention this morning.